Stranded among giants, the emergency klaxon screamed through the research vessel Meridian's corridors as Sarah Chen fought to keep the ship's dying engines online. Through the porthole, the alien world of Zephyria spun lazily below them, its crimson. Deserts and silver cities, growing larger by the second. The ship shuddered violently as another plasma blast from the pursuing pirates tore through their rear shields. "Hull breach in Section 7, shouted Lieutenant Morrison from the bridge communicator. "We're losing life support." Sarah's hands flew across the engineering console, rerouting power from non-essential systems. At 28, she had spent 6 years as a marine systems engineer, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Meridian was a peaceful research vessel, not a warship. They had no business being chased by Corvan pirates through uncharted space. "Sarah, get to the escape pods now." Morrison's voice crackled with static. "That's an order." She looked at the engine readouts one last time. The fusion core was critical, the navigation systems were fried, and the artificial gravity was fluctuating wildly. There was nothing more she could do. Sarah grabbed her emergency kit and sprinted down the corridor as the ship's metal hull groaned around her. The escape pod bay was chaos. Crew members were helping each other into the small vessels, while emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red. Sarah dove into Pod 7 just as another explosion rocked the ship. The pod systems automatically engaged, shooting her away. From the Meridian seconds before the research vessel exploded in a brilliant fireball as her pod plummeted toward Zephyr's surface. Sarah caught glimpses of the other pods scattered across the sky. Some had parachutes deployed, others were spinning out of control. She gripped her restraints and prayed to whatever gods might be listening that she would survive the landing. The pod struck the ground with tremendous force, throwing Sarah against her restraints before everything went black. When she awoke, her head was pounding and her left shoulder ached terribly. Smoke filled the pod's interior, and she could smell something burning. Sarah hit the emergency release and stumbled out into the alien world. The first thing that struck her was the sheer size of everything. The trees, if they could be called trees, stretched hundreds of feet into the purple sky. Their crystalline trunks caught and refracted the light from Zephyr's twin suns, creating dancing rainbows across the landscape. The air was thin but breathable, with a metallic taste that reminded her of copper pennies. Sarah's pod had crashed in what appeared to be a courtyard surrounded by massive stone buildings. The architecture was unlike anything she had ever seen, with flowing curves and impossible angles that seemed to defy gravity. Intricate carvings covered every surface, depicting scenes of battles and ceremonies involving beings that dwarfed human proportions. As she examined her surroundings more closely, Sarah noticed she was not alone. A group of the most magnificent creatures she had ever encountered stood at the far end of the courtyard, watching her with expressions she could not read. They were humanoid, but stood at least 9 feet tall, with bodies that seemed to be carved from living crystal. Their skin shimmered with internal light, and their movements possessed a fluid grace that was both beautiful and intimidating. The leader of the group stepped forward, and Sarah gasped at the sight of him. His crystalline body was a deep blue color, with veins of silver running through his translucent flesh. His eyes were pure white light, and when he spoke, his voice resonated like distant thunder. "Small one," he said in heavily accented but understandable English, "you have violated our most sacred temple. The punishment for such trespass is death." Sarah raised her hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "I didn't mean to intrude. My ship was destroyed, and my escape pod crashed here. I'm just trying to survive." The crystalline being studied her for a long moment. "You are not Scoreth," he said finally. "What manner of creature are you?" "I'm human," Sarah replied. "From Earth, we're explorers, not warriors." The leader exchanged glances with his companions, speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. Finally, he turned back to Sarah. "I am commander of the Valdari Defense Force. You have crashed in the Temple of the Eternal Blade, the most sacred site in our world." As if to emphasize his point, Dissis gestured toward the center of the courtyard. Sarah had been so focused on the aliens that she had missed the most remarkable feature of the temple. A raised dais of black stone stood in the center, and embedded in that stone was a sword unlike anything she had ever imagined. The weapon was clearly alien in design, with a blade that seemed to be forged from crystallized fire. It glowed with an internal crimson light that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the air around it shimmered with barely contained energy. The hilt was wrapped in some kind of metallic mesh that sparkled with embedded gems, and ancient runes covered the crossguard. "The crimson blade of eternity," the Zis said reverently. "For 3,000 years it has waited for one worthy to wield it. Countless warriors have tried and failed. It is said that whoever draws the blade will unite our scattered clans and lead us to victory over our enemies." Sarah approached the weapon cautiously, her engineer's mind immediately analyzing its construction. The blade appeared to be some kind of plasma contained within a crystalline matrix, while the hilt showed clear signs of advanced nanotechnology. This was not just a sword, she realized. It was a sophisticated piece of equipment that operated on principles she barely understood. "Who made it?" she asked, running her scanner over the weapon without touching it. "The ancestors," replied an elderly Valdari who had been standing silently near the temple entrance. His crystal body was pale green, marked with the wear of countless years. "I am High Priest Vextar, keeper of the ancient knowledge. The blade was forged in the dying days of our golden age, when our people were united under a single banner." "What happened to that unity?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Vextar's light dimmed with sorrow. "War, young one, always war. The Scoreth came from the void, bent on conquest and destruction. Our clans fought bravely, but separately, without unity, we have been pushed back, world by world, system by system. Zephyria is our last stronghold." As if summoned by his words, a new group of Valdari entered the temple. These were clearly warriors, their crystalline bodies scarred from battle, their bearing proud and defiant. Their leader was a massive female, whose body gleamed like polished amber. "Still playing with toys, these sis," she sneered. "While you waste time with ceremonies and prophecies, the Skoroth muster their forces in the outer system. They will be here within days." "General Cass," Dissis replied stiffly, "the blade could unite our clans. If we could find one worthy to wield it." "Worthy?" Cass laughed harshly. "I've seen 50 of our greatest champions try to lift that cursed thing. It sits there like a monument to our failures while our enemies prepare to destroy us." To prove her point, Cass strode to the dais and wrapped her massive hands around the blade's hilt. Her crystal body flared with inner light as she pulled with tremendous force. The weapon did not budge. She tried again, her form brightening until she was almost too brilliant to look at directly. Still, the sword remained firmly embedded in the stone. One by one, other Valdari warriors stepped forward to try their luck. Each failure seemed to deepen the despair in the room. Sarah watched with growing fascination as warrior after warrior strained against the immovable blade. It was not merely stuck, she realized. The weapon was actively resisting them. "May I try?" she asked quietly. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to stare at the small human who had dared to speak. General Cass let out a sound that might have been laughter if it had not been so bitter. "You," she said incredulously, "you're barely half the size of our smallest warrior. If we cannot move it, what hope do you have?" Sarah shrugged, trying to project confidence she did not feel. Maybe size isn't what it's looking for. She approached the dais slowly, studying the blade with her engineer's eye. The energy patterns were definitely responding to the presence of each would-be wielder, but not in the way she would have expected. Instead of seeking strength or warrior's pride, the weapon seemed to be scanning for something else entirely. Sarah reached out and gently placed her hands on the hilt. The reaction was immediate and startling. The crimson light intensified, and she felt a presence brush against her mind. It was ancient beyond measure, wise and infinitely patient. In that moment of contact, she understood what the blade was truly seeking. It was not looking for a conqueror or a destroyer. It wanted a protector, someone who would use its power not to dominate others, but to shield the innocent from harm. The weapon had been created not as a tool of war, but as a guardian's instrument, and for 3,000 years it had waited for someone who understood that distinction. "I won't use you to hurt innocent people," Sarah whispered to the blade. "But if you can help me protect those who cannot protect themselves, then I'll do whatever it takes." The sword came free from the stone, as icily as pulling a knife from. But at the moment Sarah lifted it, the entire temple was bathed in brilliant crimson light. The blade hummed with power in her hands, perfectly balanced and surprisingly light. Along its crystalline surface, new runes appeared, glowing with the same internal fire that had marked the weapon for millennia. The silence in the temple was deafening. Every Valdari stared at the small human who held their most sacred relic, with apparent ease. Sarah looked around at their stunned faces and realized that her life had just become incredibly complicated. "Well," she said with forced lightness, "I guess this means we need to talk." The unlikely champion high priest Vexter was the first to find his voice. "Impossible," he breathed, his crystal form flickering with amazement. "The prophecies speak of a great warrior, a hero of unmatched strength and noble bearing. You are ... He paused, clearly struggling for diplomatic words. "Small, weak, and definitely not noble." Sarah suggested with a wry smile. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The blade in her hands pulsed gently, and suddenly her mind was filled with images and knowledge. That was not her own. She saw the weapon's creation in the forges of the ancient Valdari, watched as it was blessed by their greatest leaders and imbued with the collective wisdom of their race. She witnessed the coming of the Skoreth, a species of conquerors who consumed entire worlds and left nothing but ash in their wake. "The Skoreth aren't just invaders," Sarah said, her eyes wide with newfound understanding. "They're destroyers. They don't want to rule your worlds. They want to strip them bare and move on to the next target." Commander Visses nodded grimly. "Our scouts report that they have already begun constructing harvesting stations in the outer system. They will strip mine our world's core and use the energy to fuel their war machine." "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "Perhaps 3 days before their main fleet arrives," General Cass replied. "Even if we could unite all the scattered clans, we lack the numbers to fight them directly." Sarah studied the blade in her hands, feeling its weight and the vast power contained within its crystalline structure. Through their connection, she could sense the weapon's capabilities. It was far more than a simple sword. The blade could channel and focus energy in ways that defied conventional physics, turning its wielder into a one-person army. But raw power would not win this war. The Scoreth had conquered dozens of worlds by overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers and superior technology. What the Valdari needed was not a mighty warrior, but a unifying leader who could inspire them to fight together instead of as scattered clans. "Tell me about your people," Sarah said to Vexter. "What divides the clans?" The elderly priest's form dimmed with sorrow, pride, mostly. Each clan believes their way of fighting is superior. The desert clans favor speed and mobility. The mountain clans trust in heavy armor and defensive positions. The crystal cavern dwellers excel at stealth and sabotage. They have been arguing about tactics for centuries, while their enemies grow stronger, and none of them will listen to the others. Tradition demands that only the bearer of the eternal blade can command all clans, Dices explained. But since no one could lift the sword, each clan has gone its own way. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had dealt with similar problems in her engineering career, though the stakes had never been quite this high. The key to managing competing factions was finding common ground and making everyone feel their expertise was valued. "Can you call for a gathering of all clan leaders?" she asked. "I need to speak with them." General Cass snorted with derision. "They will never follow an alien, prophecy or no prophecy." "You are not even Faldari." "No," Sarah agreed. "But I might be exactly what they need." The next day, representatives from 12 major clans gathered in the temple's great hall. Sarah had never seen such a diverse collection of crystal beings. Some were tall and elegant, their bodies gleaming like polished gems. Others were broader and more heavily built, their crystal forms marked with the scars of countless battles. A few were so translucent they were almost invisible, like living glass sculptures. The debates began immediately. Each clan leader stood to proclaim why their traditional methods of warfare were the only viable strategy against the Scoreth invasion. Voices rose in anger as ancient grievances and tactical disagreements came pouring out. Sarah listened patiently, making mental notes about each clan's strengths and specialties. When the arguing reached its peak, she stood and raised the crimson blade above her head. The weapon flared with brilliant light, and suddenly every voice in the hall fell silent. "I understand your frustration," she began, speaking in the clear, carrying voice she had learned from addressing engineering crews in noisy ship bays. "You've been fighting this war for generations, watching your people die while your enemies grow stronger. Each of you knows the best way to protect your clan, but none of you can protect everyone alone." She gestured to one of the clan leaders, a massive warrior whose crystal body gleamed like polished obsidian. "Chief Granite Bones, your mountain clan knows better than anyone how to hold a defensive position. Your warriors could anchor our battle lines and give the other clans something solid to rally around." The chief's form brightened with surprised pride. Sarah turned to another leader, this one tall and graceful with crystal skin like flowing water. "Lady Swiftcurrent, your desert clans are the fastest fighters on Zephyria. They could strike at the Skoroth supply lines and keep their forces off balance." One by one, Sarah addressed each clan leader, highlighting their unique strengths and explaining how those abilities could contribute to a larger battle plan. She spoke of combined operations where mountain clan defenders would hold key positions, while desert clan raiders disrupted enemy communications. Crystal Cavern stealth specialists would provide intelligence while Storm Valley warriors engaged the enemy's main forces. "But how do we coordinate such complex operations?" asked a clan. leader whose crystal form sparkled with embedded mineral veins. Our forces have never worked together on this scale. Sarah smiled and held up a small device she had salvaged from her escape pod. Where I come from, we have a saying: the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I can't fight like a Valdari warrior, but I can do something that might be even more valuable. I can help you talk to each other. She activated the device, and holographic displays filled the air around her. The crash had damaged most of her equipment, but her personal communicator was designed to interface with any electronic system. With some modifications, she could create a real-time tactical network that would allow all the clan forces to coordinate their movements. Impossible, breathed High Priest Vexter. No single mind could process information from 12 different battle groups simultaneously. You're right, Sarah admitted. No single mind could. But this isn't about me commanding everyone. It's about giving each of you the information you need to make the right decisions for your people. She spent the next hour explaining the concept of distributed command and control, using examples from human military history to illustrate how smaller forces could defeat larger ones through superior coordination and tactics. The Valdari listened with growing excitement as they began to understand how their individual strengths could be woven together into an unstoppable whole. As the meeting broke up, the clan leaders began approaching each other directly for the first time in decades. Ancient rivals found themselves discussing joint training exercises. Chiefs who had not spoken in years shook hands and promised to coordinate their preparations. General, Cass approached Sarah as the hall emptied. You have accomplished something I thought impossible, she said quietly. They are actually working together. People usually want to cooperate, Sarah replied. They just need someone to show them how. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah worked with each clan to integrate their forces into the larger battle plan, while simultaneously trying to understand the full capabilities of the Crimson Blade. The weapon was far more sophisticated than she had initially realized. In addition to its obvious combat applications, it could interface with Valdari technology in ways that enhanced both organic and artificial systems. More importantly, the blade seemed to be teaching her. Each time she held it, new knowledge flowed into her mind. She learned about Valdari tactics, their technology, and the deeper mysteries of their crystal-based biology. She began to understand that the Valdari were not just humanoid aliens, but living embodiments of their planet's crystalline matrix. On the third day, the Skoreth arrived. Sarah stood on the temple's highest spire, watching as the enemy fleet descended. From the stars, the Skoreth ships were ugly, utilitarian things, built for destruction rather than beauty. They looked like flying metal tumors, bristling with weapons and covered in heavy armor. 12 dreadnoughts, 46 cruisers, and over 200 assault transports, reported Commander Dissis through the tactical network Sarah had established. They outnumber us at least 5 to 1. Numbers aren't everything, Sarah replied, though her stomach was tight with fear. Are all clans in position? Confirmations came flooding in through the communication network. Mountain clan forces had taken position in the defensive strongholds overlooking the capital city. Desert clan raiders were hidden in the canyons too. The north, ready to strike at the enemy's flanks. Crystal cavern specialists had infiltrated the landing zones where the Skoreth transports would attempt to deploy their forces. The battle began at dawn with a massive orbital bombardment. Skoreth energy beams lanced down from their ships, striking at what they thought were the primary Valdari defensive positions. But Sarah had studied their previous conquests and knew they always followed the same pattern. Instead of concentrating, their forces in obvious strongholds. She had distributed the Valdari across dozens of smaller positions that could support each other. When the Scoreth transports descended to deploy their ground forces, they found not a defeated enemy, but a coordinated resistance ready for them. Mountain Clan artillery opened fire from hidden positions, while Desert Clan cavalry struck their flanks. Crystal Cavern infiltrators sabotaged their landing craft, causing several to crash in spectacular explosions. Sarah moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, the crimson blade in her hands channeling energies that could slice through Scoreth armor like tissue paper. But her real contribution was not in personal combat. Through the tactical network, she could see the entire battle unfolding and coordinate responses that no single clan leader could have managed alone. Enemy reinforcements approaching Sector 7, she called through the communication system. Chief Granite Bones, can your people hold them? For a time came the reply, but they will eventually break through. Lady Swiftcurrent, I need your fastest riders to hit their supply convoy in Sector 12. If we can cut off their ammunition, Chief Granite Bones can hold indefinitely. The battle raged for hours, but gradually the tide began to turn. The Scoreth had expected to face a disorganized rabble of primitive crystal beings. Instead, they encountered a unified force that anticipated their every move and countered their tactics with precision timing. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself facing the Scoreth field commander, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a crab and a tank. It towered over her, its armor-plated claws sparking with energy weapons. You were the one who organized this resistance. It growled in heavily accented English. Kill you, and their coordination will collapse. Sarah raised the crimson blade, feeling its power surge through her body. You're probably right, she admitted, but you'll have to get past this first. The battle between them was brief but intense. The Scoreth commander was larger and stronger, but Sarah had the advantage of speed and the blade's incredible cutting power. When it was over, the alien invader lay in pieces on the crystalline ground, its life fluid seeping into the soil of Zephyria, with their commander dead and their forces scattered. The surviving Scoreth began a fighting retreat to their ships. Sarah watched from the battlefield as their fleet departed, leaving behind hundreds of wrecked vehicles and the smoking ruins of their invasion force. We did it, whispered General Cass, her crystal form flickering with exhaustion and amazement. We actually won. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the crimson blade in her hands. The weapon pulsed gently, its task complete for now. Through their connection, she could sense its satisfaction. The Valdari clans were united again, stronger than they had been in centuries. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with the clan leaders to establish a new government based on cooperation rather than competition. The tactical network she had created became the foundation for a planetary communication system that would help prevent future divisions as she prepared to leave. Zephyria, a border rescue ship sent by the surviving crew of the Meridian, High Priest Vextar approached her with a question that had been troubling him. The prophecies spoke of a great hero who would unite our people, he said, but they never mentioned that hero would leave us again. Sarah smiled and handed him the crimson blade. The blade doesn't belong to me, she said. It belongs to Zephyria and the Valdari people. I was just the catalyst you needed to remember how to work together. Vextar accepted the weapon reverently, then looked at her with curiosity. What will you tell your people about what happened here? The truth, Sarah replied, that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting, but in helping others find the strength to fight for themselves. As her ship lifted away from Zephyria's surface, Sarah looked down at the crystalline cities sparkling in the light of the twin suns. The Valdari had learned to stand together, and that unity would be their true protection against any future threats. The Crimson Blade would remain as a symbol of their cooperation. But the real power had always been within them. They just needed someone to help them remember that. Asterisk.